First of all, thanks for everyone coming. This is awesome. Laurel and I are super excited to be here. So this is Bechdel IO, Future of Film and Feminism.
Welcome.
First of all, quick introductions. My name is Joe Carlson, and I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm actually not in academia. I'm a software engineer, and I work for a company called MongoDB. Has anyone ever heard that here? A couple nods? Yeah, okay, cool. We're a big database company, and it's really popular with digital humanities, actually, too, with like the scale that we can do with data. And those are my socials.
And I'm Laurel Karlsson. I am an academic. I'm a PhD student at the University of Iowa. I'm actually in American Studies. And just to clarify, we're siblings, not a married couple. It always gets weird when people assume we're married. So we're coming from two very different worlds in our careers and coming together for this project. So we're excited to share with you.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, cool. So first of all, we just want to get this out of the way. But what is the Bechdel test? We're assuming that most people have at least heard of it here, but we want to go into it regardless. So allow us to explain it to us. Actually, last time I gave this talk, it was just me without Laurel. It's a little weirder having me mansplain feminist film theory to people. So anyway, it's good to have Laurel here. This is usually people's reaction when I start explaining the Bechdel test.
I'm just
not
making
great.
it less weird.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for being here. Yeah.
All right, so it's a really simple formula for a film to pass or not pass the Bechdel test, if you haven't heard of it. So there are 3 simple rules for it. The film needs to include at least 2 women. Sometimes this rule says they have to have a name, sometimes not, so that depends. They have to have at least 1 conversation about something other than a man or multiple men. So seemingly pretty simple, right?
And the thing with this test too is a lot of films that are great probably don't pass the test. So these are all examples of films you probably love that do not pass the Bechdel test.
Some more surprising than others.
Yeah, Finding Nemo actually shocked me too. Toy Story also does not pass the Bechdel test. Also romance stories, right? Something like Breakfast at Tiffany's, no go. And every Harry Potter minus Deathly Hallows Part 2 does not pass the Bechdel test.
And that one just barely.
Yep. And Citizen Kane, some of the best films of all time, do not pass the Bechdel test.
Best films. All right, so before you judge, whenever we say we do a project with the Bechdel test, we always get met with a lot of judgment on like what this test really means. So we want to kind of talk through that a little bit. First of all, this test is not perfect. There are lots of flaws to it. First being that this really relies upon a gender binary, which not always great, right? We don't really account for non-binary characters. Transgender characters are an issue, which we'll get into in a second. So it's just not a perfect test. Also, we always have to tell people your favorite movie is not bad if it doesn't pass the test. So just because something doesn't pass doesn't mean like, oh, we hate that movie. Like, I love the Harry Potter movies, even if they don't pass it, right? On the other hand, just because a movie passes the test does not mean it's really good. It does not mean like, oh, that's a super progressive movie all of a sudden, or that it's a very feminist movie. This is only talking about gender. It's not accounting for other things like race or like disabilities. So we're just tackling this one little area of film. So basically what this test tries to do is just look at the bare minimum of what could possibly make a movie a feminist film. I mean, having 2 women talk to each other, really the bare minimum. So that's all we're trying to do here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and to pass the Bechdel test, you could talk about something as mundane as a lamp or, whatever. It's just the smallest possible bar required to have that you might have a film that slightly represents women slightly well.
Truly the bare minimum.
Truly the bare minimum.
All right, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the origin story of this project. We're making ourselves out to be superheroes here with our gifts. So this had a sort of interesting start. This project came about, I was taking a digital humanities class during my master's. I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and was feeling kind of lost because I don't have a lot of technical expertise. It was a master's in English. So I reached out to my brother, who is a software person, and kind of asked him for some tips, some ideas, and we ended up deciding that we wanted to collaborate on this. So we've done the vast majority of the work on this project without any face-to-face contact. So I was in Boulder, he was living in Honolulu at the time. Now I'm in Iowa City, and he's in Minneapolis. So it's actually rare that we're discussing this project in the same room. So it's mostly happened over the past few years remotely using like Google Hangouts and things like that. So That's how this came about.
Lots of text messages too.
Yeah.
So the work is live. If you go to Bechdel.io, you can actually check out the site right now, and you can actually upload movie scripts today to the site as well. As an engineer, this code is all open source. You can check that all out on my GitHub, Joe Karlsson at Bechdel Test. I've given similar versions of the talk at more of a software engineer audience. We've gotten quite a few contributions actually from the software engineering community to the code base who are passionate about film and feminism. But feel free to check out any of that code too if you're interested. Actually, you know what? I'm going to just show it real fast too. So this is actually the site right now. It's nothing too fancy, but yeah, we have a bunch of films on here. Allows you to upload your own movie scripts, and we give some quick overviews of it too. We are working on doing some better data visualization, but we also do a bunch of other gender-based film analytics as well, because we are parsing the screen from a gender perspective, like number of lines of dialogue per gender, number of female characters, number of male characters, lines of dialogue per character, that sort of thing too. Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. How this has worked is basically I built most of the software for the project, and Laurel made a case study based on our work together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how it's been built. I promised you there's going to be no code here and no math or anything like that, so don't freak out. But we'll dig into it a little bit too, kind of some stuff we've learned from that as well. So this is an example of a film script. Digging into this, quickly learned that film scripts make an ideal use case for computational or like programmatically analyzing this text, right? The great thing about film scripts is that they have a structure that follow regardless of who wrote them, right? You have these enter scenes, these exits, you have ways of marking when dialogue has been done by different characters. So it allows us to tell who's in a scene and who's talking during that scene. Then we can figure out the subject of that talk, and it doesn't matter across film, it's all the same. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're building this and then some ways that we've discussed to make this better in the future. So first thing that we do is we break up the movie or the film script into scenes, right? Because it's important with a Bechdel test. It's important to tell that two female characters have to have a conversation in a scene together. So we need to start breaking that up by the scenes. And we do that by checking these keywords on here. Int is a good way for you're entering a new scene. There's a couple keywords in film scripts that we look for, but we look for that specific thing to start. We have a new scene beginning. Next thing we want to do then is identify the genders of each of the characters in that scene. So what we do is we tell which character names are on there, and then what I do is I go to IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, and then I check to see which gender of the person playing that role is in real life. We will discuss some limitations to that specific thing in a little bit, but we're using the IMDb data on there to discuss or figure out who's playing what. As you can see from this scene, Samantha and Mom are both female characters, and Mason is a male character. And if you can't tell, this script is from Boyhood. Okay, so first thing, we break up into different scenes. We identify the gender of each of the characters via IMDb data. And then we determine if there's multiple women in that scene. So here we have two characters who are in fact female in that scene, so we can progress to the test. The last part is actually the hardest part of algorithmically analyzing film scripts. And that's kind of identifying the subject of their conversations. So we need to figure out whether they had a conversation about a man or men in that scene. So here, what we're doing currently is we're looking for specific keywords. Laurel and I work together pretty closely to just like discuss keywords that might signify whether a man or men is being discussed in that scene. So here we see two words, sir and dad, in the scene that might signify that we're talking about a man. We have a bunch of others, prince, king,
boyfriend, like
he,
it goes
him.
so far beyond what you would think, just like he, him, like we had to make this huge list, and that's another place where we can continue to improve this, so we think of more words that could fit into that list.
Absolutely. In this thing, we see that we did, in the scene, we have two female characters that do discuss dad, so the scene would not pass this test for us. Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some lessons learned from this and kind of ways to expand this out. First things first, we discussed that patriarchal keywords are pretty hard to identify. We have a lot of words that are man-based that might not necessarily signify that a man is actually being discussed. For example, in this back scene, or the last scene here, Samantha's referring to her mother as a sir, kind of as a joke, as it's being like she's a sergeant in the army or something like that, right? And that's not necessarily that they're discussing a man in that scene. It's just that those keywords have gotten so ingrained in our culture and our language that it's hard for us to tell.
And just sarcasm makes things hard as well.
It does.
Just being sarcastic. What do you do?
Absolutely. So as noted earlier, our app pulls data from IMDb, and it pulls it from whatever IMDb identifies their gender in real life. We assume that that's their gender in the application. So this, for example, not work for characters or playing transgender characters in films.
And our cisgender in real life.
Yes.
Like Jeffrey Tambor from what's it called?
Transparent, yes. Or like Tootsie or Boys Don't Cry, right? These films, this would not be able to correctly identify that with our films. And that can get into bigger issues too of whether, how does IMDb, should they be tracking that data? Right? How do we represent that? Should cisgender people be playing transgender people? We're not getting into that, but it does lead to those issues as well. Cool. The other thing too, this has been a good opportunity for me. I've been doing a lot of digital humanities work outside of this project too, but it's been a great project to get people on my side of the fence, kind of the software world, involved with software, with the digital humanities, which a lot of them don't even know that it exists. So, cool. All right, one little thing here too. Actually, I'm going to talk a little bit about something I'd like to do in the future with this too, is we've been doing like manual parsing for data. I think an interesting way would be start using NLP or natural language processing. It's advanced quite far too, to do like some sentiment analysis and subject analysis, and send that to like a machine learning thing to kind of identify it. That's a future use case. We haven't gotten there yet, but we'd love to expand it there. And I will leave this too. This has actually been really huge for the software engineering community whenever I give this talk. But there's actually a Bechdel test for software engineering. It's calling a function written by a woman, or as a woman calling a function written by another woman and using that. So what's something to stew on?
All right, so we're going to move into the more like maybe traditional academic aspect of this talk, which is a small case study we did with 2015 Oscar films. So I promise this will be short, but we collected a bunch of data there, and I thought it was really interesting to look at. You could see some of the films we had on our front page of our website. A lot of them may look familiar as 2015 Oscar films. So as you've learned so far, the Bechdel test is often used to highlight the sexism present in the film industry, as a surprising number of films do not pass the test, despite the test's relatively simple requirements. So while feminism as a general concept has become much more socially accepted in recent years, the film industry is still very largely dominated by men. In order to get a feel for the current state of the film industry, we've chosen to analyze 13 films that were nominated for Oscars in 2015 in the following highly anticipated categories: Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, and Best Supporting Actress. So here are the Best Picture nominees here. So a quick glance at the Bechdel test pass-fail data for the 87th Academy Awards makes the gender imbalance really clear. Of the Oscar-nominated films that we were able to test, only 38.46% passed the Bechdel test. And this percentage is actually somewhat generous, as only 28.57% of the Best Picture nominees passed the test. So the category of Best Picture gives the best general overview of the year's critically acclaimed films, as the Best Picture category is not limited by the gender of the lead actors, as something like Best Actor or Best Actress would be. So when the Academy has free reign to choose the 8 films that they feel were the best overall films of the year, it's incredibly revealing to see how those 8 films stack up in terms of gender. While 28.57% of the Best Picture nominees passed the Bechdel test, it's also important to note that all 8 of the nominees were focused on a male-dominated narrative, each of them featuring a male lead rather than a female lead. So if you've seen any of these, that should resonate with you. It's also important to note I'll move to my next slide here. To note the lack of overlap between Best Picture nominees and films featuring a nominee for Best Actress. Only one of the films featuring a nominee for Best Actress was also nominated for Best Picture. That was The Theory of Everything. What this reveals is the lack of lead actresses being featured in Best Picture nominees, which points out the Academy's preference for films with a male-dominated narrative. On the other hand, 4 of the films featuring a nominee for Best Actor were also nominated for Best Picture. This was The Theory of Everything, American Sniper, The Imitation Game, and Birdman. So it's easy for Best Picture nominees to also feature a nominee for Best Actor when all the Best Picture nominees are led by men. This preference for male-led narratives is also present in the Bechdel Test statistics for films featuring a Best Actor nominee versus a Best Actress nominee. While 50% of the films featuring a Best Actress nominee passed the test, neither of which were also nominated for Best Picture, only 20% of the films featuring a Best Actor nominee pass. So the Academy's preference for male-dominated films is very obvious here. When nominating women for the category of Best Actress, they are forced to look outside the canon of Best Picture nominees, since very few of the Best Picture nominees feature a lead actress at all. So there were a few challenges in just doing this case study that we haven't mentioned quite yet. So the first was that the film Selma, which was nominated for Best Picture, the screenplay was just not openly available online. We just weren't able to find it. So we weren't able to include it, which was interesting. Another challenge was the film 2 Days, 1 Night. This was a French language film that was subtitled in English, so the screenplay wasn't available in English, it was only available in French, so we weren't able to include it. It wasn't suited for our tool. So the analysis of 2015 Oscar films says a great deal about the film industry as a whole, we think. When the majority of the year's most critically acclaimed films do not pass the Bechdel test, there is a clear issue with the opportunities for women in every area of the film industry. Not only are leading roles not nearly as available to women as they are to men, but very few women are writing and directing Oscar-nominated films. In order to create valuable roles for women, women need to be involved in the filmmaking process, and we need women making films in order to tell important stories about women.
Yeah, and we're always looking for contributions to the code
Yes.
base as well. So if you know anyone's interested, please let us know. And that's it. Keep in touch, but thank you so much for having us.
Any questions?
Nice job.